Derek, aisle 5 needs a restock. Mr. Henderson's voice, amplified by the tinny PA system, echoed through the aisles of Henderson's groceries, my personal purgatory. I sighed, expertly maneuvering a pallet jack laden with questionable-looking canned peaches around a gaggle of screaming toddlers. Another day, another dollar. Or, more accurately, another minimum wage paycheck. Life wasn't exactly glamorous. Days were filled with stacking shelves, dealing with grumpy customers. These avocados are rock hard. Do you even know what ripe means? And dodging Mr. Henderson's attempts to rope me into unpaid overtime. Just a few more boxes, Derek, and then you can go. My real life started after my shift ended. The moment I clocked out, I was no longer Derek, the grocery store drone. I was Deathstalker, the wasteland wanderer, the survivor, the virtual badass who could take down a mutant horde with a rusty pipe and a well-placed headbutt. Dude, you're still playing that post-apocalyptic crap? My roommate Ben would ask, shaking his head as I hunched over my aging laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my face with an unhealthy pallor. It's not crap, Ben, I'd retort, expertly dodging a virtual zombie's lunge. It's called Wasteland Warriors, and it's a masterpiece of strategic survival and resource management. Ben, a business major with dreams of corporate domination, would just roll his eyes. Whatever, man. You're wasting your life on those games. You should be out there networking, building your resume, climbing the ladder. The ladder to what? I'd ask, genuinely curious. Another soul-crushing job like this one? Ben would shrug, unable to comprehend my lack of ambition. He didn't get it. He couldn't. In the real world, I was a nobody. But in the wasteland, I was a legend. I knew how to scavenge for supplies, craft weapons, build shelters, and fight off hordes of mutated creatures. I was the ultimate survivor. Maybe one day those skills will come in handy, I'd mutter to myself as I logged back into the game, the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins as I prepared to face another virtual apocalypse. Little did I know, that day was closer than I thought. Derek, we need to talk. Madison's voice, usually bubbly and playful, was now serious, tight. I looked up from my laptop, my character mid-battle with a mutated bear, and frowned. Can it wait, babe? I'm about to… No, Derek, it can't. She stood in the doorway of my tiny apartment, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of frustration and pity. That was new. I sighed, reluctantly pausing the game. All right, what's up? She took a deep breath, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her arms. This isn't working, Derek. I can't do this anymore. My stomach lurched. Do what? What are you talking about? Us, she said, her voice flat. You and me, it's over. The words hit me like a gut punch. Madison, my Madison, the one bright spot in my otherwise mundane existence. The girl who laughed at my jokes, who tolerated my gaming obsession, who was now dumping me. But why? I stammered, my mind reeling. What did I do? It's not what you did, Derek, she said, her voice softening slightly, but not in a comforting way. It's what you're not doing. I don't understand. You have no ambition, Derek, she said, her voice taking on that familiar, condescending tone I had come to dread. You're content to stock shelves and play video games all day. You have no goals, no dreams, no future. But I'm happy, I protested, though the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. We're happy. I'm not, she said, her voice firm. I can't be happy with someone who's stagnant. I need someone who's driven, who's going places, who can build a future with me. And I can't? She shook her head, her blonde hair swaying with the motion. You're stuck in a dead-end job, Derek. You have no drive, no ambition. You're just there. The words stung, a cruel assessment of my perceived inadequacies. Madison, with her perfect grades, her prestigious internship, her dreams of a high-powered career. She was right. I was just there. I met someone, she continued, her voice a mix of guilt and excitement. Someone who understands me. Someone who has ambition, who has a plan. Who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jason, she said, a faint blush creeping onto her cheeks. He's a lawyer, corporate law. He's everything you're not. Jason, the guy with the fancy suit, the expensive car, the condescending smirk. The guy who represented everything I hated about the real world. I'm sorry, Derek, Madison said, her voice softening again, but the pity in her eyes was more insulting than comforting. But I need more. I need someone who can keep up with me. And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone in my tiny apartment, the glow of the laptop screen casting long shadows on the walls, the virtual wasteland suddenly seeming more appealing than ever. I was a nobody, a loser, a gamer with no future, just there. It started with a cough. Not just any cough, mind you, a hacking guttural sound that seemed to tear its way out of people's throats, leaving them gasping for air, their eyes glazed over with a disturbing, feverish intensity. Dude, you all right? I asked Ben, who had been hacking and wheezing for the past hour. Sounds like you're coughing up a lung. I'm fine, he rasped, his voice hoarse, his face pale. Just a cold, I think. Famous last words. The news, initially dismissive. Just a seasonal flu, folks, nothing to worry about. Quickly escalated to full-blown panic mode. Quarantine, lockdown, martial law. But it was too late. The virus, whatever it was, spread like wildfire, turning people into, well, not people anymore. The first transformation I witnessed was unforgettable. Mrs. Peterson, the sweet old lady who always bought her cat food on Tuesdays, suddenly started convulsing in the middle of the cereal aisle. Her eyes bulged, her skin turned a sickly green, and her teeth, well, let's just say they weren't meant for chewing oatmeal anymore. Holy crap, I yelled, backing away as Mrs. Peterson, now more monster than human, lunged at me, her claws extended, her mouth foaming. Mr. Henderson, we have a situation. Mr. Henderson, bless his cheapskate heart, tried to reason with the creature. Now, Mrs. Peterson, there's no need for that. Just put down the, claws, and we can discuss a senior discount on those tuna snacks. It didn't end well. The grocery store, once a haven of mundane predictability, quickly descended into chaos. Screaming customers, panicked employees, and a growing number of mutated monstrosities rampaging through the aisles. It was like something out of one of my games, except realer. Way realer. This is insane, Ben yelled, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. It's like wasteland warriors come to life. He wasn't wrong. The virus, the mutations, the breakdown of society, it was all eerily familiar. And for the first time in my life, my gaming obsession felt less like a waste of time and more like training. All right, Ben, I said, grabbing a can of beans, might need that later, and a sturdy mop handle, improvised weapon classic. Time to put those survival skills to the test. We fought our way out of the grocery store, dodging mutated customers and leaping over toppled shelves. The streets were even worse. Cars were abandoned, buildings were burning, and the air was filled with the screams of the infected and the shouts of the survivors. This is it, Ben, I said, as we barricaded ourselves in my apartment, the sounds of chaos echoing outside. The apocalypse, the real deal. Ben, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, grinned. Game on, Derek. Dude, we're trapped! Ben paced my tiny apartment, his anxiety level rising faster than a mutated zombie on a sugar rush. We're gonna starve! We're gonna get infected! We're gonna… Chill, Ben, I interrupted, calmly rummaging through my cupboards. We've got this. He stared at me, incredulous. Got this? Derek, we're in the middle of a freaking apocalypse. There are flesh-eating monsters outside, and you're looking for… what? Expired ramen noodles? Ramen provides essential carbohydrates, I explained, tossing him a packet. And besides, we need to prioritize. Shelter, water, food, weapons. It was like my brain had flipped a switch. Years of playing wasteland warriors had ingrained a set of survival instincts I didn't know I possessed. Scavenging, crafting, strategizing, it all felt strangely familiar. First, I declared, we need to secure the perimeter. Ben, still in panic mode, just stared at me blankly. I sighed. Dude, help me barricade the door, and find something heavy to block the windows. While Ben frantically piled furniture against the door, I surveyed my surroundings with a new perspective. The fire escape, potential escape route, the toolbox under the sink, weapon crafting station, the empty pizza boxes. Okay, those were just trash. All right, Ben, I said, brandishing a rusty pipe I'd found in the closet, surprisingly effective in close combat, according to wasteland warriors. Time for a supply run. Ben's eyes widened. Supply run? Are you crazy? We can't go out there. Relax, I said, channeling my inner Deathstalker. I've done this 1,000 times, just virtually. We cautiously ventured out, the streets a scene of utter chaos. Abandoned cars, burning buildings, and the occasional mutated creature shambling through the debris. But I wasn't afraid. Not really. This was my world now. A world I understood. A world I was strangely prepared for. See that pharmacy over there? I pointed. We need medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, maybe some painkillers, and keep an eye out for anything sharp. Knives, scissors, even a rusty spoon can be a weapon in the right hands. Ben, still hesitant, followed my lead. We scavenged through the abandoned pharmacy, adrenaline replacing his fear. He even managed to take down a stray mutated dog with a well-aimed fire extinguisher. Who knew those things were so versatile? I did it! He exclaimed, his voice a mix of shock and exhilaration. I actually killed something. See? I grinned. You've got the survival instinct, Ben. You just needed the right motivation. As we returned to the apartment, laden with supplies, a sense of purpose settled over me. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. And I, Derek, the grocery store worker, the gamer, the nobody, I was a survivor. Turns out being a wasteland expert had its perks. Word got around the apartment building about the guy who knew what to do. Mrs. Gonzalez from 3B, a surprisingly spry senior with a mean right hook, offered her knitting needles. Surprisingly effective stabbing weapons, apparently. Mr. Chen from 2A, a former engineer, contributed a toolbox and a surprisingly detailed knowledge of structural integrity. We need a base, I declared, surveying the motley crew gathered in the hallway. Somewhere defensible, with access to resources. Like a fortress? Ben asked, his eyes gleaming with a newfound respect. With walls and turrets and maybe a moat? Moats are impractical, Mr. Chen interjected. Difficult to maintain, susceptible to contamination. Okay, no moat, I conceded. But definitely walls, and a gate, a big, imposing gate. We chose the abandoned sports complex a few blocks away. Solid concrete structure, plenty of space, and most importantly, a high fence surrounding the perimeter. All right, people, I announced, channeling my inner Deathstalker. Time to build a sanctuary. We'll call it Fort Hope. The name was cheesy, I knew, but it seemed to resonate with the survivors. They needed hope. And I, the guy who once spent his days stacking canned peaches and his nights slaying virtual zombies, was going to give it to them. Derek, Mrs. Gonzalez said, brandishing her knitting needles with a surprisingly menacing glint in her eyes. Tell me what to do. And that's how it started. We fortified the sports complex, turning it into a haven in the chaos. Mr. Chen, with his engineering know-how, reinforced the walls, built makeshift defenses, and rigged up a rainwater collection system. Mrs. Gonzalez, a surprisingly skilled organizer, established a rationing system and a surprisingly strict curfew. Lights out at 9 p.m., people. We can't afford to waste batteries. I, meanwhile, focused on the practicalities. Scavenging for supplies, organizing patrols, and, yes, occasionally bashing in the skulls of mutated creatures that got too close to our walls. Headshot, I yelled, taking down a particularly nasty-looking creature with a well-aimed brick. XP for everyone. The survivors, initially hesitant, quickly adapted to the new reality. They learned to fight, to scavenge, to rely on each other, and they looked to me, the unlikely leader, for guidance, for protection, for hope. "Derek," Ben said one evening as we sat by a crackling fire, sharing a can of scavenged beans. "I never thought I'd say this, but thanks for, saving us." I shrugged, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fire. It's what any decent wasteland warrior would do. And as I looked out at the faces of the survivors, their eyes filled with a newfound determination, a flicker of hope in the darkness, I knew that this was my purpose. This was my world. And I, Derek, the nobody, the gamer, the unlikely leader, I was finally home. Fort Hope was becoming something special. What started as a ragtag bunch of survivors huddled in an abandoned sports complex had evolved into a proper community, a beacon of order in the chaos of the wasteland. We'd expanded beyond the initial fence, securing the surrounding buildings. The gym became our armory. The pool was now a heavily chlorinated reservoir, and the locker rooms were, well, still locker rooms, but with significantly less sweaty gym socks. "Derek, we need more beds," Mrs. Gonzalez declared, her organizational skills kicking into overdrive. "And a proper infirmary, and maybe a library. People are getting bored." "A library?" I raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. G, we're in the middle of an apocalypse. I'm not sure war and peace is a top priority right now." "A mind needs nourishment, Derek," she retorted. "Just like the body. Besides, we have a surprising amount of romance novels. Apparently, the apocalypse doesn't discriminate when it comes to guilty pleasures." I chuckled. She had a point. Fort Hope wasn't just about survival. It was about rebuilding, creating a sense of normalcy in the midst of the madness. And Mrs. Gonzalez, with her surprisingly extensive knowledge of both first aid and classic literature, was becoming a valuable asset. Security was tight. We had patrols, watchtowers, and a surprisingly effective alarm system rigged up by Mr. Chen. Turns out, tripwires and empty cans make a surprisingly loud racket. The gate, once a flimsy chain-link fence, was now reinforced with steel plates and manned by our most experienced fighters. "No unauthorized personnel beyond this point," a gruff voice boomed as a group of ragged survivors approached the gate. "State your business." We heard about Fort Hope," one of them stammered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "We need shelter, protection." "We're full," the guard said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But we can offer you supplies and directions to the nearest settlement." I watched the exchange from the watchtower, a sense of satisfaction mixed with a lingering unease. Fort Hope was strong, yes, but the wasteland was vast and the dangers were endless. We couldn't save everyone. "Derek," Ben said, his voice serious, "we need to expand our reach, secure more territory, gather more resources." "I know," I sighed. "But we can't overextend ourselves. We need to be strategic." "We need allies," Ben insisted. "Other settlements, other groups. We can't do this alone." He was right. The wasteland was a dangerous place, and even the strongest fortress could fall if isolated. I thought back to wasteland warriors, to the alliances, the betrayals, the ever-shifting balance of power. "All right," I said, making a decision. "We'll send out scouts, establish contact with other settlements, propose trade agreements, alliances, but we need to be careful. Not everyone out there is friendly." And so, Fort Hope evolved. From a simple shelter to a thriving community, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And I, Derek, the grocery store worker, the gamer, the nobody. I was the leader, the protector, the king of this little corner of the wasteland. A responsibility I hadn't asked for, but one I was determined to fulfill. "All right, team, listen up." I addressed the assembled scavengers, a mix of seasoned veterans and eager recruits. Today's target, the old shopping mall. We're talking clothes, tools, maybe even some luxury items, if we're lucky. A ripple of excitement ran through the group. Scavenging runs were always risky, but the potential rewards were worth it. And with me, the wasteland warrior himself, leading the charge, their confidence was high. "Remember the plan," I continued, pointing to a crudely drawn map of the mall. "We stick to the main corridors, avoid the food court, too many mutated pigeons, trust me, and watch out for looters. We're not the only ones looking for goodies." We ventured out, armed with scavenged weapons and a healthy dose of caution. The mall, once a bustling hub of consumerism, was now a desolate ruin. Shattered glass crunched underfoot, mannequins stood frozen in grotesque poses, and an eerie silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the occasional scuttling sound of mutated rats. "This place gives me the creeps," whispered Sarah, a young scavenger with a surprisingly accurate aim with a slingshot. "Just like the abandoned city level in Wasteland Warriors," I said, grinning, "except with less virtual death." We moved through the deserted stores, gathering supplies, clothes, tools, first aid kits, even a few working flashlights. Score. I kept a watchful eye on the surroundings, my senses heightened, my mind replaying countless hours of gameplay, anticipating potential threats. "Derek, check this out," Ben called from the sporting goods store. "Jackpot." He was right. A whole rack of baseball bats, some even with metal spikes. Ouch. "Nice find, Ben," I said, grabbing a particularly hefty bat. "These will be perfect for persuasion." Suddenly, a crash echoed from the upper level. "Looters!" someone shouted. "Crap," I muttered. "Showtime." This wasn't in the original plan, but hey, adaptability was a key survival skill. "Ben, Sarah, you're with me. The rest of you, secure the exits. No one gets in or out." We crept up the escalator, surprisingly still working, though with a concerning grinding sound. Weapons at the ready. A group of rough-looking figures were ransacking a jewelry store. Their leader, a burly man with a mohawk and a nasty scar across his face, barking orders. "All right, you scavengers," the leader growled, spotting us. "Hands where I can see 'em, and nobody gets hurt." "I wouldn't be so sure about that," I said, stepping forward, my bat held high. "This is our territory now." The looters laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Your territory? You and what army?" I gestured towards the shadows, where my team was emerging, weapons glinting in the dim light. "This army?" The ensuing fight was messy. But thanks to my strategic guidance and Ben's surprisingly effective use of a hockey stick, we managed to subdue the looters without any casualties. "Tie 'em up," I ordered. "We'll decide what to do with them later." We finished our scavenging run, returning to Fort Hope with a haul of valuable supplies and a few bruised egos. Mine mostly, thanks to a surprisingly agile looter and a misplaced trust in the structural integrity of a display case. "Good work, team," I said, addressing the assembled survivors back at the fortress. "We secured valuable resources and defended our territory. Fort Hope is stronger because of your efforts." A cheer erupted, a mix of relief and pride. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors, providers, a community. And I, Derek, the gamer, the nobody, I was their leader. "Tonight we feast," I declared, raising a can of scavenged peaches, slightly dented but still edible. "To Fort Hope." The cheers grew louder, echoing through the fortified walls, a testament to our resilience, our strength, our hope. And as I looked out at the faces of the survivors, their eyes filled with gratitude and trust, I knew that this was more than just a game. This was my life now, and I was finally playing for keeps. "All right, newbies, listen up," I barked, surveying the latest batch of recruits, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. "Welcome to Combat 101. Today's lesson, how to not die." Life in Fort Hope wasn't all scavenging runs and cozy nights by the fire. The wasteland was a dangerous place, and even within our fortified walls, we couldn't afford to get complacent. That's why I'd started mandatory combat training. Rule number 1, I continued, demonstrating a surprisingly effective jab with my trusty baseball bat. Always assume the enemy is faster, stronger, and uglier than you, because they probably are. The recruits, a mix of former office workers, students, and even a surprisingly buff yoga instructor, looked appropriately intimidated. Rule number 2, improvise. A weapon is anything you can swing, stab, or throw. A chair leg, a rusty pipe, even a well-aimed can of beans can be lethal in the right hands. I demonstrated, launching a can of beans at a makeshift target, a particularly unfortunate-looking mannequin we'd salvaged from a clothing store. The can connected with a satisfying thud, leaving a surprisingly large dent. "Nice shot, Derek," Ben exclaimed, his admiration for my wasteland expertise growing with each passing day. "Years of practice," I shrugged, secretly pleased with myself. Those virtual zombie hordes really helped hone my aim. Rule number 3, I continued, know your enemy. Mutated creatures, looters, rival factions. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. Study them, learn their patterns, exploit their vulnerabilities. I launched into a detailed explanation of the various mutated creatures we'd encountered, their attack patterns, their weak points, and the best ways to, well, neutralize them. Turns out those hours spent analyzing enemy stats in Wasteland Warriors were actually useful. "Now pair up and practice," I ordered. "And remember, no headshots. We need you alive for the real fight." The recruits, initially hesitant, quickly got into it. The yoga instructor, surprisingly agile, was a natural with a crowbar. The office workers, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose, and probably some repressed aggression, were surprisingly vicious with their makeshift weapons. But it wasn't enough. I could teach them the basics, the techniques, the strategies. But true combat skills came from experience, from facing real danger, from pushing your limits and surviving. "All right, team," I announced. "Time for a field trip. We're going hunting." The recruits' eyes widened. This wasn't just sparring anymore. This was the real deal. We ventured out, armed and cautious, into the wasteland surrounding Fort Hope. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the distant growls of mutated creatures. I led the way, my senses heightened, my mind analyzing the terrain, anticipating potential threats. "Remember," I whispered, "stay alert, stick together, and trust your instincts. And if you see something with more than 2 eyes and teeth the size of your fist, run." We encountered a pack of mutated dogs, their eyes glowing with an eerie green light, their fangs bared in a silent snarl. The recruits, initially hesitant, quickly sprang into action, their training kicking in. They dodged, they weaved, they struck, their makeshift weapons connecting with satisfying thuds. I watched, offering guidance, encouragement, and the occasional well-aimed brick. Old habits die hard. The recruits fought bravely, their fear giving way to a fierce determination, a primal instinct to survive. And then it happened. One of the recruits, a young woman named Emily, stumbled, her ankle twisting beneath her. A mutated dog lunged, its jaws snapping shut. "Emily!" I yelled, adrenaline surging through me. I reacted instinctively, throwing myself in front of her, my bat connecting with the dog's skull in a sickening crunch. The dog yelped, its form dissolving into dust. Emily stared at me, her eyes wide with gratitude and something else. Admiration? "Thanks, Derek," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You saved me." "No problem," I shrugged, trying to downplay my heroism. Just part of the job. But it was more than that. I had risked my life for her, for one of my own. I was no longer just a gamer, a survivor, a leader. I was a warrior, a protector, a hero. And as we returned to Fort Hope, the setting sun casting long shadows on our triumphant figures, I knew that this was more than just a game. This was my reality now. And I was ready to face it, head on, bat in hand, with the courage and determination of a true wasteland warrior. News travels fast in the wasteland. Faster than a mutated rabbit on a sugar rush, actually. And the news about Fort Hope, about the guy who led it, about the wasteland warrior himself, well, that news spread like wildfire. "Did you hear about Derek?" I overheard two scavengers whispering in the marketplace. They say he took down a whole horde of those giant spider-like things, single-handedly. Yeah, and he rescued that caravan from the raiders, another voice chimed in. They say he's got magic powers or something. Magic? Nah, he's just really good with a baseball bat, the first scavenger scoffed. But he's definitely a badass. They call him the Savior of the Wastes. Savior of the Wastes? I muttered to myself, a wry smile tugging at my lips. That was a new one. My reputation was growing, morphing, becoming something legendary. I was no longer just Derek, the leader of Fort Hope. I was a symbol, a figure of hope, a force to be reckoned with. Derek, a young boy, no older than 10, ran up to me, his eyes wide with admiration. You're the Wasteland Warrior, right? The one who can fight monsters and build fortresses and save people? I chuckled, ruffling his hair. Just Derek, I said, and yeah, I try my best. You're a hero, the boy exclaimed. Everyone says so. Heroes are just people who do what needs to be done, I replied, remembering some cheesy line from a comic book I'd read as a kid. Now what's your name, kid? I'm Billy, he said, and I want to be just like you when I grow up. The weight of those words settled on my shoulders. A hero, a role model, a symbol of hope in a world desperately needing one. It was a heavy burden, but it was one I was willing to carry. Derek, Ben said, approaching me, his voice serious. We've got a problem, a big one. What is it? I asked, my mind already shifting into crisis management mode. The ironclad raiders, he said, his voice grim. They're moving in. They've heard about Fort Hope, about our resources, our strength. They want it all. The ironclad raiders. A notorious gang of raiders, known for their brutality and their ruthlessness. They were the biggest threat in the wasteland, a force that had crushed smaller settlements, enslaved survivors, and left a trail of destruction in their wake. How many? I asked, my voice calm, but my mind racing, strategizing, planning. Hundreds, Ben replied. Heavily armed, well-equipped. They're not messing around. All right, I said, a steely glint in my eyes. Time to show them what Fort Hope is made of. We prepared for war. We reinforced our defenses. We armed our fighters. We strategized. We planned. We anticipated every possible move the raiders could make. I drew on my years of gaming experience, remembering every raid, every battle, every strategic maneuver I had ever used in Wasteland Warriors. Remember, I said to my assembled warriors, my voice echoing through the fortified walls. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for hope. We're fighting for the future. The battle was brutal, a clash of steel and fire, a desperate struggle for survival. The raiders, with their superior numbers and their heavy weaponry, were a formidable foe. But we were prepared. We were united. And we had something they didn't. We had hope. I fought alongside my warriors, leading the charge, inspiring them with my courage, my skill, my unwavering belief in our victory. I was no longer just Derek, the leader. I was the Wasteland Warrior, the symbol of hope, the legend. And in the end, we prevailed. We repelled the raiders, driving them back into the wasteland, leaving their dead behind as a grim warning to any who dared to challenge Fort Hope. The victory was hard won, but it was a victory nonetheless. And as I stood on the ramparts surveying the battlefield, the cheers of my warriors echoing through the night, I knew that this was more than just a battle. This was a testament to our strength, our resilience, our unwavering spirit. The legend of Derek, the Wasteland Warrior, the savior of the wastes. It was now etched in the very fabric of the wasteland. And as I looked out at the world, the dangers still lurking in the shadows, I knew that my journey was far from over. But I was ready. I was prepared. I was a legend. Jason, wake up. Madison shook her boyfriend's limp shoulder, her voice a desperate plea in the echoing silence of the abandoned penthouse apartment. No response, just the vacant stare of lifeless eyes and a rapidly cooling body. Damn it, Jason, she sobbed, her carefully manicured nails digging into his expensive suit. You were supposed to protect me. Jason, the corporate lawyer, the man of ambition and power, had been useless in the face of the apocalypse. His legal expertise didn't extend to fighting off mutated creatures. His expensive suits offered no protection against the harsh realities of the wasteland, and his network of powerful contacts. Well, they were probably all dead or mutated by now. What am I going to do? She whispered, her voice trembling with fear and despair. Melissa, her once loyal companion, had abandoned her weeks ago, lured away by the promise of safety and security in some other settlement. Now Madison was truly alone. She scavenged for food in the deserted apartments, dodging the occasional mutated creature and avoiding the more dangerous areas of the city. Her designer clothes were tattered, her once perfect hair matted with dirt, her carefully cultivated image of sophistication shattered. This can't be happening, she muttered, huddled in a corner of a ransacked apartment, her stomach growling with hunger, her body shivering with cold. I was supposed to be successful, powerful. I was supposed to have it all. The irony was bitter. She had left Derek, the gamer, the loser, with no ambition, for a man who promised her a future of luxury and security, and now she had nothing. No food, no shelter, no protection, just the gnawing fear of survival in a world gone mad. One day, huddled around a crackling fire, she had finally figured out how to make one after several failed attempts and a few singed eyebrows. She overheard a conversation between two scavengers. "Did you hear?" one of them said, his voice hushed with awe. "They say there's a fortress somewhere in the north, a safe haven with walls and guards and a leader who can actually fight those monsters." "Yeah," the other scavenger replied. "They call him Derek, the Wasteland Warrior. He's a legend." Derek. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Derek. The man she had dismissed, the man she had deemed unworthy of her ambition, the man she had left behind. He was now a legend, a savior, a leader. "Derek," she whispered, a flicker of hope igniting in her heart. Maybe he could help her. Maybe he could forgive her. Maybe... She knew it was a long shot. She had hurt him, betrayed him, abandoned him, but she had nothing left to lose. Her pride, her ambition, her carefully constructed image. They were all meaningless now. All that mattered was survival. "I need to find him," she said, her voice firm, a new determination hardening her gaze. "I need to find Derek." And so she set out, following the rumors, the whispers, the legends of the Wasteland Warrior, the man she had once loved, the man she had cast aside, the man who was now her only hope. The journey to Fort Hope was a brutal test of Madison's newfound survival skills. Gone were the days of taxis and private jets. Now she walked. Miles stretched into days, her designer shoes replaced with scavenged boots, her perfectly tailored suits traded for rough-spun rags. She dodged mutated creatures, evaded bands of raiders, and bartered what little she had left for scraps of food and information. "Fort Hope? Yeah, I heard of it," a grizzled old scavenger told her, accepting a tarnished silver bracelet in exchange for directions. "Headed by some fella named Derek. They say he's a real tough nut, but fair, if you can get past his guards, that is." The guards were indeed a problem. Towering figures in scavenged armor, their eyes hardened by the harsh realities of the wasteland. They blocked the entrance to Fort Hope, their weapons glinting menacingly in the afternoon sun. "Halt! State your business," one of them barked, his voice rough, his gaze unwavering. I need to see Derek," Madison stammered, her voice barely a whisper, her carefully rehearsed speech dissolving in the face of their intimidating presence. "Derek? You mean the commander?" The guard scoffed. "He's a busy man, doesn't have time for every stray wanderer who comes knocking." "Please," Madison pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "It's important. Tell him Madison is here." The guard's eyebrows shot up. Madison. Madison. He exchanged a look with his companion, a flicker of recognition and perhaps a hint of amusement passing between them. Clearly, Derek had shared stories that didn't paint her in the best light. "All right," the guard grunted. "Wait here, but don't get your hopes up." He disappeared into the fortress, leaving Madison standing in the dust and the shadows, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of her long and arduous journey. She looked at her reflection in a cracked window of a nearby building. Gone was the polished corporate executive. In her place stood a haggard, desperate woman, her face smudged with dirt, her hair tangled and unkempt, her eyes filled with a fear she had never known before. The guard returned, his expression unreadable. "He'll see you," he said, stepping aside, "but don't expect a warm welcome." Madison entered Fort Hope, her senses overwhelmed by the sights and sounds of a thriving community. Children played in the makeshift courtyard, scavengers bartered goods in the marketplace, and the air buzzed with a sense of purpose, of hope, of life. This was the world she had dismissed, the world she had deemed unworthy of her ambition. And now, it was the only world that mattered. She was led through the bustling fortress, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and shame. She passed by well-equipped workshops, organized living quarters, and a surprisingly cheerful-looking mess hall. This was what Derek had built. This was what she had abandoned. Finally, she was ushered into a large, dimly lit room. Derek sat at a massive table, maps and charts spread out before him, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a lantern. He was different. Harder, stronger, his eyes bearing the weight of leadership, of responsibility. He was no longer the boy she had known, the gamer she had dismissed. He was a man, a leader, a king. "Madison," he said, his voice deep, resonant, a far cry from the hesitant tone she remembered. "What a surprise." "Derek," she breathed, her voice trembling. I need your help." He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Help? From me? The man with no ambition? The loser you left behind?" The word stung, a cruel reminder of her past cruelty, her blindness, her arrogance. I know," she stammered, her eyes filling with tears. "I was wrong. I was horrible. But I'm begging you, Derek. Please, I have nothing left." She looked around at the bustling fortress, the well-fed people, the sense of order and purpose. This was the world she had scoffed at, the world she had deemed irrelevant. And now, it was the only world that mattered. "You have everything, Derek," she continued, her voice cracking with desperation. "Power, respect, a community. I have nothing. I'm just a nobody." The word hung in the air, a cruel irony, a reversal of their former roles. She, the high-achieving corporate climber, was now the nobody, while he, the gamer she had belittled, was the king. "You said I had no future," Derek said, his voice cold, unforgiving. "Now you're begging me to give you one?" Madison's carefully constructed facade crumbled. She sank to her knees, her pride dissolving in the face of her utter desperation. "Please, Derek," she begged, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll do anything. Just don't leave me to die out there." He looked down at her, his eyes hard, his expression unreadable. Madison, the woman who had broken his heart, who had mocked his passion, who had dismissed him as a loser, was now at his mercy. The silence stretched, each second a torture, a reminder of her humiliation, her vulnerability, her complete and utter dependence on the man she had once scorned. And in that silence, Madison knew that her fate, her very survival, rested in the hands of the man she had so carelessly discarded. Madison knelt before me, a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her eyes, once sparkling with ambition and confidence, were now dull with desperation, her designer clothes replaced by rags, her carefully sculpted image shattered, revealing the raw fear beneath. She was begging, pleading for a chance, for a future, for survival. And the irony of it all, it was almost too much to bear. "Please, Derek," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll do anything. Just don't leave me to die out there." I looked down at her, the woman who had once been my world, my everything. The woman who had dismissed me, mocked my passion, and ultimately broken my heart. She was right. She had nothing left. Her power, her status, her carefully constructed image, all gone. Just a desperate woman clinging to the hope that I, the man she had scorned, would somehow save her. "You said I had no ambition, Madison," I said, my voice calm, controlled, but laced with a bitterness I couldn't quite suppress. "That I was just there, a loser playing video games." Her eyes flickered, a spark of hurt, of recognition crossing her face. She remembered. Of course she remembered. How could she forget? "I was wrong," she choked out, tears streaming down her dirty face. I was so wrong." "You were," I agreed, my gaze unwavering. "You were wrong about a lot of things, Madison. You were wrong about me. You were wrong about what mattered. You were wrong about everything." She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling. "Please, Derek," she whispered. "I'm begging you. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance." I looked at her hand, at the dirt beneath her fingernails, at the callous skin that had replaced the manicured perfection I once knew. She had learned to survive, yes, but she hadn't learned humility. She was still trying to manipulate, to play on my emotions, to use me for her own gain. "You want a chance?" I asked, my voice hard. "You want me to just forget everything? Forget the way you dismissed me, the way you belittled me, the way you walked out of my life without a second thought?" She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "No," she sobbed. "I don't expect you to forget. I just need help. I'm scared, Derek. I'm so scared." "Scared?" I echoed, my voice laced with irony. "You're scared now? What about me, Madison? Weren't I scared when you left? Weren't I scared when I realized I had lost the one person I thought I could trust?" She didn't answer, her head bowed in shame. "You said I had no future, Madison," I continued, my voice unwavering. "But look at me now. I'm leading a community, building a future, protecting the people who depend on me. And you? You're begging for scraps, for shelter, for a chance to survive in the world I built?" I stood up, the decision made. It wasn't easy. A part of me, a small, foolish part, still wanted to reach out, to offer her a hand, to forgive her. But I knew I couldn't. Not for her sake, not for my own. "I'm sorry, Madison," I said, my voice firm, resolute. "But I can't help you." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief, with a dawning realization of the finality of my rejection. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you can't. You wouldn't." "I would," I said, my voice cold, unwavering. "You made your choice, Madison. You chose ambition over love, status over loyalty, a fleeting illusion of security over a genuine connection. And now, you have to live with the consequences." I turned and walked away, leaving her kneeling there in the dust and the shadows, her cries echoing through the courtyard. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I reached the gate, I gave the order. "Close the gates." The heavy steel doors creaked shut, the sound of final, decisive punctuation to our story. I watched the security monitors as Madison collapsed in despair, her shoulders shaking, her hope extinguished. She was alone, just like I had been. It was a harsh decision, a cruel decision, perhaps even an unforgivable decision. But it was a necessary one. For me, for my community, for the future of Fort Hope. I had learned a valuable lesson in the wasteland. Survival wasn't just about fighting monsters and scavenging supplies. It was about making tough choices, about protecting what you had built, about refusing to let the past dictate your future. And as I walked away, the image of Madison's despair etched in my mind, I knew that I had made the right choice. I had chosen strength over weakness, resilience over regret, and the future of my community over the ghost of a love that was never truly mine. The gates were closed, and for Madison, and for me, there was no going back.